I just unmuted that. Yeah, no sound. Sorry about that. I had literally just clicked unmute and I don't know what happened to the mic. So sorry about that. Was just saying we have a gross game for Monday Night Football, but it's fun for Showdown. We have Giants and Steelers here. Yeah, apologies for the delay there. I just looked and was like, damn, that's why does it say I'm muted? We are good now. Yeah, no, it was not just you, it was me. We're gonna go position by position here: quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, tight ends, defenses, kickers. I'll take questions, play around with some lineups at the end. If you have any questions, you can ask throughout the show. Typically, I just prefer if you stick to questions about the positions that we're talking about. A lot of time I'm talking about quarterbacks and people start asking about tight ends, and it's like I'll get there, I swear. But feel free to answer any questions. Anthony says FanDuel after. Yeah, I'll take a look at FanDuel once I've gone through position by position. We'll just take a quick look and see what's different in terms of price, projected ownership, all of that kind of stuff. Yeah, it is a classic line. What else? Oh yeah, while you're coming in, please do like the video, subscribe to the channel. It's funny, Drew. I did have one person yesterday was asking me, why did I not get a notification when your channel went live? And that's on me, because I have not been reminding people. If you want to get notifications when I go live on YouTube, just click that little notification button. It's a bell on YouTube. Then you can get notifications when I go live. So that is the reason. That's on me. It's one of those things that they tell you to do when you're doing these reads, and I just have not been telling people to get notifications, because I feel like a lot of people probably get annoyed by notifications. But if you want them, click that little bell to get notified when I go live. All right, we're going to start here at quarterback. Daniel Jones and Russell Wilson are the quarterbacks here. Actually, let me refresh this just in case. I don't think that anything should have changed with inactives. There was nothing surprising with the inactives, but just want to make sure I'm the most up to date with all of the projected stuff here. So we'll start at captain. Russell Wilson coming in at 15.5% projected ownership at captain. Daniel Jones, 9% projected ownership at captain. In the flex, Russell Wilson, 51%. Daniel Jones, 42%. Both are decent rushing quarterbacks. Russell Wilson rushed for like 23 yards per game last year. Daniel Jones over the past couple of years around 30 yards per game. Again, just a few seasons removed now, maybe 2 seasons removed since Daniel Jones rushed for over 700 yards. So both are decent in terms of rushing. Starting with the ownership aspect, I guess, I don't really have any major issue. Neither of them is like my favorite captain. I definitely prefer Daniel Jones at 9% over Russell Wilson at 15.5%, but don't have any huge issue with either of these numbers. They both feel about right. If I were, building just one lineup and I was going to play a quarterback and the captain, I'd probably play Daniel Jones just for the lower ownership, but really tough matchup with the Steelers. Honestly, I don't even know that I believe that take. I think the ownership is just kind of about where it should be for both of these guys. Neither is my favorite captain on the slate. They're both kind of, that seems about right. I don't think the ownership really stands out there. In the flex, I do imagine I will be fading probably both of them relative to these numbers somewhat. And that's just kind of, I'm expecting this to be a low scoring game. For a quarterback to really get there, and like I said, both of these are decent rushing quarterback, so they can put up more than your average quarterback in a low scoring game. But typically for a quarterback to put up a big score, they need to be scoring touchdowns or a ton of yards. But if they're throwing for over 300 yards, they're probably also scoring some touchdowns. And I just don't think this is a game where I'm expecting that. I think both teams are going to struggle to score in this game, and other positions can put up fantasy points, bigger fantasy points without scores, because other positions get a point per reception. They get more yards per receiving. Every pass, the receiving option gets more fantasy points. The runner scores more, takes 10 yards on the ground to get a point as opposed to 25 through the air, et cetera, et cetera. So in a low scoring game, it's harder for the quarterbacks to get there. And these are pretty high numbers on both of the quarterbacks. So I imagine I'll be a little bit lighter on both Russell Wilson and Daniel Jones relative to these numbers. I'm not saying they're bad options. I'm still going to have a fair amount of both. They're two of the, we can sort by fantasy points. Russell Wilson, the highest projection on the slate. Daniel Jones, the fourth highest projection on the slate. But I think it'll be at least a light fade for me with the quarterbacks because I think that there are other options that I am going to like better. As far as correlation goes, I think theoretically you could play Daniel Jones naked in the flex. My rules, I'm not allowing for it. If I were playing 150, I might allow for naked Daniel Jones in the flex because again, just a couple seasons removed from 700 rushing yards in a season, he can do a bit on the ground. Russell Wilson, I never would. He even though they're not that far different in terms of rushing yards. I guess this year, Russell Wilson only 3 yards in his one game, but kind of both in that kind of 20 to 30 rushing yards game is sort of, I think, where they're going to end up this season. But I think Daniel Jones still has, more upside in a single game to put up a pretty strong rushing game. Yeah, this is, I'm not sure what to make of it that Andrew Thomas is out. Like, yeah, it's going to be bad. Like the offensive line for the Giants, not going to be great without Andrew Thomas. I don't know that means he's going to be running more or just like dumping it off more. I guess my expectation is dumping it off more. If you think that he could benefit potentially, like it's possible that he benefits from, I just don't, I don't think that he's going to benefit rushing wise from missing one of his better offensive linemen. So yeah, I probably a light fade for me with the quarterbacks. If I play Daniel Jones in the flex, I am requiring at least one pass catcher. I think you theoretically could not because of the rushing. In the captain spot, I would always want to have him with at least one pass catcher, preferably multiple. I think generally, yeah, he got sacked. I mean, yeah, it's not great. The Giants' offensive line already struggling, and now they lost, I think, their best offensive lineman. Keith says Andrew Thomas, according to Gruden, has not been good. I mean, yeah, maybe he hasn't been great, but I think he's been better than whoever they're replacing him with. Like, I don't think it's an upgrade to lose your starter here. So, yeah, I'm probably fading the quarterbacks lightly. If I'm playing Russell Wilson, I'm always stacking him up regardless of where he is in my lineup. If I have him in the captain spot, I'm requiring at least 2 pass catchers with Russell Wilson. With Daniel Jones, I believe I'm only requiring 1 pass catcher. I think you could do it either way, 1 or 2 when you have Daniel Jones in the captain spot. I think that's kind of all. I guess we can take a look at schedule adjusted for the quarterbacks. That's not the right page. So this is on the season. For Russell Wilson, it actually looks like not a terrible matchup. I want to say it was like 14th. I should pull up my article and double check the number, but you can see it's around 14th or so best matchup for quarterbacks. It is more so via the run. Looks like quarterbacks have scored more fantasy points over what would be expected via the run, less via the pass, which doesn't do a ton for Russell Wilson. And then it's a bad matchup for Daniel Jones, which I think we kind of know. Like the Steelers just have a really good defense. It is a bottom 6 matchup for quarterbacks against the Steelers, so it's probably going to be tough for the Giants. Should be easier for Russell Wilson. I'm not a huge believer in Russell Wilson just yet. He was better than I expected in the last game, and I think we were on that, so that was good that we were on it. But that was kind of a bet against our like expectations for that game. Now, if he's going to get a lot of ownership, then I'll just make the other bet that he's going to look more like he did in the first quarter of that game, and not be that awesome. So again, light fade for me on the quarterbacks. I guess we'll figure out throughout the show how much of a fade it's going to be, how much I like other positions. It's a tough slate because there's nobody who's to me just an obvious like this is the slam dunk play. I do like Tyrone Tracy being alluded to. I like him quite a bit, but still not just like an absolute slam dunk. But I anticipate that I will be somewhat fading the quarterbacks in somewhat tough matchups. All right, move on. Talk about the running backs. And yeah, Najee Harris has the highest projection on the slate. Obviously, Tyrone Tracy is only 4,400. He's going to look really good at 4,400, assuming that he is the starter for the Giants, which I think is likely but not assured. Let's start with the Steelers side of the game. I'm going to pull up my Coach Speak Index Discord to read what the quote from the coaches, Brian Dable, about the running back room for the Giants, because I thought it was kind of interesting. Not very clear how you want to interpret it, but I thought it was kind of an interesting question they got there. We'll start with the Steelers side of the game. And actually, I'm going to pull up my article right here just to make sure that I do all this research. I want to make sure I have the research that I've done in front of me, and that is kind of the easiest place for me to find it. Here it is. Yeah, so Najee Harris, has had great workload so far this year. He's been kind of the bell cow. Jalen Warren has also missed some time, but I think it's pretty likely that sounds like he is slight fading quarterbacks on this slate. Yes, good. Correct. I think Najee Harris feels like a pretty good bet. Like he does have the better workload for the Steelers. Again, there's nobody that I feel super confident in on this slate. There's no like, oh, this guy is going to have a big fantasy game, but Najee Harris feels as likely as anybody. As you can see here, he has the fifth best projection on the slate. I mean, just behind Daniel Jones. He's 9,200. I think he looks pretty good in the captain spot. Najee Harris coming in at 11% ownership. Yeah, that seems fine to me. I'm not seeing any ownership here that really stands out to me as wrong. So I see some ownerships that I like here, but none of these like stand out to me as like, oh, I definitely want to be above this. I definitely want to be below that at captain. I think at flex, maybe we'll find some more of those. But I think, 11% on Najee Harris. I would guess over that number. Like, I think I'd rather play Najee at captain than Russell Wilson probably at these ownership numbers. So yeah, I think I'll probably end up a little bit high on Najee Harris in the captain spot. And then in the flex, we've got Najee coming in at 35.5% ownership. That seems okay also. Let's take a look at the schedule adjusted stuff. So for Pittsburgh, as you can see here, it is ninth best possible matchup if I counted right there. Not a bad matchup for running backs against the Giants defense. Looks pretty strong so far this year. For the Giants, below average matchup has not been that terrible. But again, the Giants missing their left tackle is going to make things tougher for the running game, I would imagine. So it's going to be tough going, I think, for the Giants offense just in general. I think that is going to be the case for every position to some extent. But yeah, Pittsburgh, above average matchup with the Giants so far this year. I think they run that I want to get away from it. I imagine I end up overweight on Najee Harris at 35.5% in the flex and at 11% in the captain spot. Jalen Warren, sort of interesting. He's 7,200. Man, that's he's right around the same price as window yesterday, and that was a lot went right yesterday on that slate. The part that went really wrong was Isaac Orendo was just like a no-brainer no to me yesterday. He was 7,000 backup running back, doesn't have much of a standalone role. So that was I was ready for a big night, and then when Jordan Mason got hurt and it was the Isaac Orendo show, and he looked great. That was brutal for me. But Jalen Warren has more of a standalone role. So at 7,200, I don't have any real issue with that. Here, I'm going to move this down to running backs. Jalen Warren, 7,200. Let's take a look at. So this is last week's usages. It's kind of interesting. His best week of the year last year in terms of usage, split snaps 50-50, Najee Harris and Jalen Warren, as you see here in week 7. 21 carries for Najee Harris, 12 for Jalen Warren, just to show you how much they do run. Cordero Patterson out again this week, by the way, so that is helpful. But 12 carries, and also more of the routes, 58.1% route participation to 22.6% for Najee Harris. This is all really bullish for Jalen Warren to me. The route participation in particular, 3 targets, really like that. 12 carries on top of it. Again, they have the better match. Even at 7,200, I kind of like the numbers for Jalen Warren coming in at 27% ownership. I think I'm probably there. I'm probably right there, maybe even a little bit high on Jalen Warren. I also do think you could play them both together. Unlikely that they both put up like 20 fantasy points. Like, I don't really think that is how this shakes out. I guess it's possible. But I think in a low scoring game where you just won't need a huge score, I think you could see like 11 from Jalen Warren, 15 from Najee Harris. enough for both of them where you want to have both of them in your lineup. So yeah, I really like the Steelers running backs. I don't have an issue. I think I probably come in overweight to both of them. Could see myself playing both Jalen Warren and Najee Harris together, even if I have one of them at captain. I don't have an issue with that. I get that question sometimes, so I just want to answer that ahead of time. Yeah, I think it's totally fine, even if you have one of them at captain, to have the other one in your lineup. 5% projected captain ownership for Jalen Warren. No major issue there for me. It's not a spot where I see 5% and I think I want to get way over that. But it is, kind of a fine number. Just if you want to make the bet on the trend from last week continuing, where he is running all of the routes, maybe he sees a few more targets. Also, part of the reason that I like it is, as I've said, I kind of game where you're going to want some PPR scams in your lineups, because I think it's going to be a lot of the defenses getting pressure on the quarterback and the quarterback just dumping it off. So like low A-dot throws throughout the game. And I think that benefits running backs. Like a pass catching running back looks awesome in this environment. So that particularly benefits Jalen Warren. I also think that, I think they'll be able to run okay anyway. So the combo of, I could see when they are passing the ball, maybe the running backs have a larger share than usual if the Giants are able to get pressure on the quarterbacks. So that makes me really like Jalen Warren. But I also think, they running backs have had success against the Giants defense. So I do think the Steelers running backs are a spot that I'm going to get to a fair amount. Yeah, Warren at captain, 5% seems fine to me. Like, he wouldn't be the first captain into my lineup, I don't think, because he is the 1B, but I don't have an issue with 5%. Like, I think I'd probably get to 1 in 20 lineups. So I think I'm probably right with the field on Warren at captain. Yeah, I mean, that's how I feel too, Sean, obviously. And I said that on the show. I was like, nah, I'm not doing that. But of course, yeah, he was already priced up as though Jordan Mason was out. Maybe Jordan Mason really was, a little bit, he was, kind of came into the game a little bit banged up. So maybe should have anticipated that it was more likely that he would re-aggravate that injury. But it was one of those where it was like, even if he does re-aggravate it, it's still not a guarantee that, like, Jordan Mason's not, or sorry, Isaac Rendo's not $1,000, where it's like he's probably going to hit. It was still like he still has to have a good game anyway. So things just went terribly there. But hey, we nailed George Kittle, obviously CeeDee Lamb, Zeke. A lot of stuff went well for us. Just not everything. I'm not playing anybody else outside of on the Steelers, outside of their two main running backs. Not get to any Shampklin. Yeah, I don't think he's likely to play much. So yeah, it's just comes down to Najee Harris, Jalen Warren for me. Shampklin would really probably only be like in a blowout. Even if Najee Harris or Jalen Warren got hurt, I think it would just be the other one taking up more of the workload. So not really a ton of contingent value. He's 200, so I guess if you want to play the blowout angle, you could, but I don't think I'm getting there with Shampklin. The other side is where it gets super interesting. I love the Steelers side, but I also really do like Tyrone Tracy for some of the reasons that I just talked about with Jalen Warren, where I think he is going to be the passing game running back, regardless of whether he has he was cut. Okay, I didn't even notice that Shampklin was cut. That's a good note there. He's getting a projection for some reason. I think Tyrone Tracy. So let me read the quotes. So before we jump into Tyrone Tracy and Devin Singletary, let me just the quote from Brian Dable. He was asked, and there's actually a video clip here that I watched and thought it was sort of interesting the way the interaction went. But it's kind of like in reading the interview, it kind of felt like the reporter was like wanted to hear that, yes, he wanted to confirm that it was going to be Devin Singletary's backfield when he was back fully healthy. Like was sort of my vibe from the way it was, like he was phrased to Brian Dable. But here's what Brian Dable said. He said, "I feel good about Devin Singletary." And then on whether Dable expects Singletary to have a bigger workload, he said, "I'd say all three of the backs are going to play, just like what we talked about last week. I have confidence in the three of those guys, and based on how the game's going, we'll see who has more of a role, less of a role, but all three of them will play." So that's about Singletary and Tyrone Tracy and Eric Gray. He says all three of them will play. He seemed kind of annoyed by the question, was at least my reading of the situation, like didn't want to give anything away with the running backs, but was not willing to say, like he was kind of being led to say, yes, Devin Singletary will have a bigger workload. And he did not bite on the leading question. He said all three of them will have a role. So he didn't say like, yes, his role will expand as he gets healthy. He just said all three of them will have a role. You could, Immortal, I can't post the link. It's in the Coach Speak Index Discord. It's $5 to get in. So if you want access to it, if you want to watch the clip of Dable, you can get into the Coach Speak Index Discord. I highly recommend it. It's well worth it if you are somebody who likes to read up on all this stuff. It's really separated by team, so it's easy to find quotes for like the specific game you want to look at. But if you're not doing content, maybe not everybody needs to do so. But yeah, I find it to be super useful, super easy way to find what is being said by the coaches recently. And this one I thought was pretty interesting. But yeah, unfortunately, I cannot post a link because it's a private Discord. You have to pay to be in there. Yeah, that's fair. It's fair that he's annoyed by the question, but I thought it was an interesting one. So I think Tyrone Tracy has just been better than Devin Singletary so far this year. So I kind of am working on the assumption that Tyrone Tracy continues to be the lead back. But I'm not super confident in that. I think he's going to be involved either way, though. Like he's been good enough that I'd be pretty surprised if they just take away Tyrone Tracy's role. And he's 4,400. The price is just too cheap for his role. So I do have a lot of interest in Tyrone Tracy, and he's the one that I see the captain ownership at 5%. That does stand out to me as, yeah, I want to be above 5% on Tyrone Tracy. He's cheap enough that you can play him at captain, and play, whoever you want, basically. Not whoever you want, but a lot of the stronger plays in the rest of your lineup. So yeah, I'm very interested in Tyrone Tracy at captain at 5% ownership. And it's a tough matchup, obviously, with the Steelers. Again, going back to the schedule adjusted stuff, it is I guess just bottom half, not as tough, but I think it is a tough matchup, even if it doesn't grade out quite as poorly as I think it should. Like I think it's a bottom 5-10 matchup for running backs. And it doesn't bear out here, but still a negative matchup. But I do think he falls into the same kind of camp as Jaylen Warren, where I think it could just be a PPR scam. Like I think he could just be targeted a lot on dump offs as the Steelers defense just gets to Daniel Jones immediately on many plays, and he just dumps it off to running backs, tight ends, et cetera, et cetera. So I do think I like Tyrone Tracy because I think at this price tag, like he could just have 6 receptions for 30 yards, and that's enough at this price tag in a low scoring game potentially. Good note from Adam G. Yeah, if you use Tyrone Tracy at captain in particular, I mean, I always leave some salary on the table, but particularly if you're using a value play at captain, I think it is a good idea to leave a little bit of salary on the table just to avoid the most duped lineups. Like if you use a lineup that has Tyrone Tracy at captain and then has, if you can fit in like all of, Najee Harris and Russell Wilson, Daniel Jones, Malik Nabers, whatever, just like the stone chalk, and you use the full salary cap, it's going to be duped, 200 times. So just to avoid those lineups, if you want to avoid those lineups, which I do, maybe not everybody does, maybe you don't really care about that. You want to, if you win $10,000, you're okay with that. That's fine. You don't need to. But if you want to avoid the most duped lineups, have the strongest EV, you probably don't want to play Tyrone Tracy at captain and use the full salary cap because you're probably going to run into dupes. Brandon says Tracy should be $7,000. Agree with that. I think he should be right around the same price as Jaylen Warren, and he's not. And I think he is probably still the lead back. Devin Singletary then. So again, Tracy at 5% captain ownership, like that. I'll make sure that I force my way onto a higher number than that. In the flex, also 28%. I like that also. I'm going to force my way. Like he's one of the bigger stands that I think I'm going to take on this slate, is getting overweight on Tyrone Tracy. I think there's more risk involved with it than like Zeke last night. I loved it, but part of the reason I loved it with Zeke was I didn't think there was that much risk. Like I thought he was pretty clearly going to be their RB1. And he was too cheap. Tyrone Tracy, a little bit more expensive. There is some risk that he's not their RB1, that it is Devin Singletary's, backfield, or at least like it's a complete split backfield. So it's not like the quite the same level, but the talent is there. I think he's going to have opportunities, and it's still just 4,400. So I really like it at these ownership numbers. I think I'll probably end up with Tyrone Tracy in about half my lineups overall, and at least like 10-15% in the captain spot. Devin Singletary, so 19.5% protect ownership at 8,400. I want to love Devin Singletary. I want to like find a reason to play him. I don't think I can do it at 8,400. It is, I don't know. It's like even if he does take on that role, like the lead back role, I'd be pretty shocked if he took on a role where he's getting 20 touches in a game. I shouldn't say shocked, but I'd be surprised if he had like 20 touches in a game. I think he's most likely, like, best case scenario to me with Devin Singletary is like a 60-40 split, maybe 65-35 split. I don't think that he's anything close to a bell cow. And I think it's even, if I had to guess who's going to have more touches in this game, I would probably like bet on Tyrone Tracy, who is $4,000 cheaper. So all things considered, it's like best case scenario for Devin Singletary, like out of this world. If he had 20 carries, or sorry, 20 touches, still facing a really tough Pittsburgh defense, and he's 8,400. It's just going to be tougher for him to pay it off. So I think I'm probably fading this at least somewhat. I don't know that he's necessarily going to be a full fade the same way Isaac Guerrero was last night. Like, I think he's a better play than Guerrero was last night. I don't know. He is 8,400, so he's more expensive also. But like, I'm not like completely writing it off the way I did with Guerrero last night. But at 19.5% ownership, I think there's a pretty good chance that I don't end up with any Devin Singletary in my lineups. And if he happens to score a touchdown, I'm probably dead, but not necessarily, because he's 8,400. To me, it's a spot that I'm going to be underweight to 19.5%. I can say that pretty confidently. I don't know that I'll have zero, but I'd be surprised if I got above 10% Devin Singletary. And then in the captain spot, where is he? There he is. 3% projected ownership in the captain spot. Still, seems fine. I don't love it, but if you want to play it through, Devin Singletary is just the dude. Like, it's possible for him to have 2 touchdowns. Oh, you're talking about Kyle Pitts. Okay. It's possible. It's possible for Devin Singletary to just have, like, maybe there are 2 pass interference calls in the end zone, and they decide Devin Singletary is their better goal line back. Yeah, that is within the range of outcomes for Devin Singletary. Definitely more likely than it was yesterday for Isaac Guerrero, and certainly worked out for Guerrero. Red zone carries inside the 10 for the Giants, says Devin. Tracy 1, Gray 3, Singletary 6. Yeah, I mean, he could surprise us with some touchdown. I don't know if they're going to have a lot of touchdowns. So part of it is just like, I don't really think they're going to score a lot of touchdowns. But like I said, like, you see it, it always looks like, oh, there's no way for this running back to hit, and then pass interference in the end zone, and suddenly they're on the 1 yard line, and then the running back you don't have scored the touchdown. So that could happen for Singletary. He's getting enough ownership at 19.5% that I don't feel like betting on it. I think I'd rather just bet against it. But yeah, I see you. Alex says Devin Singletary. It certainly could happen. Two troll touchdowns within the range of outcomes. If you want to play Devin Singletary, I don't think it is like as bad as Guerrero last night. I don't want to say it's bad. We saw Bryce Morrow, one really sharp guy, won with an Isaac Guerrero lineup. But like, if you're not playing 150, I wouldn't have played Isaac Guerrero. And Devin Singletary, I'd be more inclined to get to him. Like, if I have 1 in 20 lineups or so, then I think that's a fine number for Devin Singletary. Just 19.5%. I don't love the odds there. But yeah, good note on red zone carries. I don't know. I'm not overly concerned about it. Obviously that is worth something. The red zone carries, those are valuable carries for a running back. I don't want to downplay it. I just don't think they're going to be scoring a ton of touchdowns tonight. The other thing is, everybody's kind of making the same assumptions. Like, where, if you listen to any content today, and I did an expert survey, I've done content on it, everybody's kind of assuming, yeah, the Giants are just not going to be able to score. They only scored 3 points against the Eagles last week without Andrew Thomas. This is a better defense that they're playing against. Of course, they're not going to be able to score. So everybody's kind of making that assumption. Often it can pay off to play it the other way and say, well, what if the Giants do score a lot? I like to sometimes play those lineups. So if you want to do a Daniel Jones lineup with Malik Nabers and Wanda Robinson, that's cool. Playing for a different game script is often what you'll see sharp players do, is say, okay, if the entire field is going to play it, like, 5-1 Steelers or 4-2 Steelers. If you want to do like 5-1 Giants, I looked at ETR stuff earlier. That looks like the way to get contrarian is to play 5-1 Giants, just specifically with Devin Singletary. I think the ownership is too high relative to what I think his odds are of success. I think Tyrone Tracy has a role here. So again, my bet is going to be on Tyrone Tracy. I feel a lot more comfortable with that one because I can be wrong and still pay off at 4,400. If you want to make the bet on Devin Singletary at 8,400, you can be right and still not have it pay off. So it's kind of because of the price tag, and I think it's actually more likely that Tyrone Tracy, like if I had to bet, 50-50 odds, I would bet on Tyrone Tracy having more touches than Devin Singletary. Not with a lot of confidence, but and just I guess we can take a look at last week how it split out. And this was Devin Singletary's first game back, so I don't want to overstate like that this is how it is going forward. I'm not saying that at all, but 67% of snaps for Tyrone Tracy, 22% for Devin Singletary, 6 carries for Tracy, 5 for Singletary, 3 targets on 62.5% route participation for Tracy, 1 target on 15% for Singletary. And this is part of the reason I think that there is at least a possibility that this holds is Tracy had been really good in the 2 games prior to this. So it just kind of looked like he kind of, brought some life into the offense a little bit more so than Singletary. So I think that there's at least some possibility that Tracy does just retain the bigger role. But it's a possibility, not like the likeliest scenario that Tracy continues to have this much of a better workload than Singletary. But I think Tracy just, again, for those who don't know, he was a wide receiver in college. I think he's going to be the pass catching back regardless. And I really like the pass catching role in a game where I'm not anticipating a ton of touchdowns. I'm anticipating a lot of pressure on the quarterback, a lot of short passes. So that makes me really like Tyrone Tracy. Anything else? I don't think there's any. So Singletary, a little bit too much ownership for me. I don't think I'm going to get to Eric Gray. Again, the quote is that Eric Gray will have a role. What did he have last week? 5 snaps, 1 carry, 4 routes run, 1 target. I mean, at like 0 ownership, I think he is very much a like sprinkle into your lineups if you're playing several lineups. He doesn't stand out as like he has an awesome, a cool role that people are underplaying. I think it's more of he might have a few opportunities in the game. Yeah, he's projected for a sub 1 fantasy point, just 1% projected ownership. So I don't hate it. Like I think he's probably one of the better cheap options on the slate, but I don't think I'm necessarily going to get to any Eric Gray. I think currently I have 30 lineups reserved, and I don't anticipate getting to any Eric Gray. I think in a 150 set, I would probably go try to get to, 3-4% and just hope for goal line look and he scores a touchdown or something weird to happen. Maybe a couple PPR, maybe contingent value, whatever. But yeah, he's not a priority for me. Tyrone Tracy would be the priority running back for me from the Giants. I think that's it for running backs. Anything else? We'll move on to wide receivers now. 1 carry, 1 target is a role. It is a role. That is technically true. All right. I mean, yeah, Devin, that is right. Like you see a lot of like pros, if you look through their lineups, there's going to be a lot of pros building through Daniel Jones, just playing it through the Giants. And I think that is a sharp way to play it for sure. Okay. Let me get rid of this. Okay. Do you put 30 into the 150 max instead of just 20 into the 20 max? So what I've been doing mostly this year is I max out the $3.20 max, and then I just play 10 in the $15 lotto. That's typically what I do. It kind of changes up based on the day, based on how good I feel about the slate, how much time I think I'm going to have. Like I might enter more if I end the show on time. I have not been. Like I'm gonna give myself 5 minutes to build, so I don't want to reserve too many with the amount of time. But sometimes after, that's typically just my go-to, and then I will adjust if I have more time to actually make lineups that I like after the show. All right, let's move on. Talk about some receivers. Move this here. Malik Nabers has the best projection on, I think maybe on the entire slate, at least of the receivers on the slate. Depending on where you look, best or second best projection on the slate. Projects really well, 44% projected ownership. Captain ownership projected for 13.5%. I have no issue with either of those numbers. I think I probably come in over this number at captain. At flex, I'm not positive that I would come in over 44%. I am a little bit shook by last week for Malik Nabers. Just with like he was barely like didn't even see like he's been targeted a ton all year, I think. And actually, let me double check this. I believe even the targets were down last week. 8 targets. I mean, that's down relative to the 18, 12, and 15 he had seen the 3 weeks prior. So I don't want to overstate that. It was also his first game back after missing a couple games with his concussion. So that may have played a role also. I don't want to, 8 targets is a really, really strong role here. My concern is, are they going to have enough time to get the ball to him? And I think that they will, because I think that they are going to manufacture enough touches for Malik Nabers that it's not a huge issue. Talk more about how you pad your winnings using Flash Draft. Yeah, I can. Let me talk about Malik Nabers first. Yeah, really strong route. Like the route just made back up to 92.5% last week. Had 8 targets. That's 27.6% target share. He is just they forced the ball to him. And earlier in the year, Brian Dable was asked like, "Are you comfortable with your top receiver, your rookie receiver, getting 12 targets per game, whatever?" And he was like, "Yeah, like no issue with targeting Malik Nabers a ton." So yeah, he's one of the better. Speaking of like, if you like PPR points, Malik Nabers should have a ton of PPR points just in general. Like, so I think Malik Nabers looks really strong. Looks like a really good target bet. I believe he still has the highest target share. Yeah, he still has the highest target share in the NFL this season, 34.5% target share. They just want to get the ball to Malik Nabers. My concern is just that the offense won't be able to move the ball at all. Maybe the Steelers double him, whatever. But I think Joey Porter, I think somebody asked about this, so we can take a look at. Do I have this pulled up somewhere? Yes, I do. Wide receiver cornerback matchup. I believe we're anticipating shadow coverage. Yeah, so he's expected to be shadowed by Joey Porter. As you can see here, it's a bad matchup. He's so good that he's still expected to have success in this matchup. He's listed as having the advantage here. That's just because he's so good that he's going to have the advantage on anyone. So this is worse than it would be, because again, you can see of all the players who are listed, all the wide receivers who are listed as having an advantage, it's most of them have good matchups, and then it's like Puka Nacua, Justin Jefferson, Malik Nabers. Like it's the really good receivers. It just doesn't matter. They're listed as having an advantage here. So this has him as like the wide receiver 16, 17 on the week. Most weeks he's going to be better than that. It's not a good matchup, but he's so good that he has the advantage always. So even with the projected shadow coverage by Joey Porter, Malik Nabers still looks good in this spot. So again, yeah, I think captain ownership looks good. I'll take the over on 13.5% Malik Nabers. Flex 44%. I imagine I end up a little bit light there, just because I'm not sure they're going to actually be able to move the ball there. I think the receptions will be there, maybe not the yards, maybe not the touchdowns. So maybe I'll be a little bit lighter in the flex, a little bit higher in the captain spot on Malik Nabers, and hope for those 10 receptions or something where he's just a total PPR scam. And of course, he's a really good receiver, so he might be more than just PPR scam. He might actually have success even in a really tough spot. So yeah, I think he good enough receiver that even in a really tough matchup, I think he looks good. So if he is getting shadowed, does that mean he will see more single coverage? Probably. That's honestly, that is not my strong suit answering that question. So this is one that would be helpful to have somebody who's been doing football analysis for forever. That's a really good question. I don't know. I don't know that they necessarily leave him in single coverage more often because they're shadowing him. You kind of have to think that they would want to take him away. But I honestly don't know the question. I think that they're going to be under a lot of pressure. I think Daniel Jones is going to be under a lot of pressure. I think that they're going to manufacture touches to him. But I don't know. That's a good question. Okay. Bill Belichick said on Manningcast a few weeks back that he would put his best corner on top wide receiver and double the second best player. Nothing to do with this game. That is kind of cool. That's interesting. Maybe that's what the Steelers will do. Um, yeah, dink and dunk is exactly what I'm anticipating for this game, and of course, wrong all the time on this stuff. But just looking at all the different data that I've looked at, that kind of appears to be the case, or what I would expect to be happen most often in this game. All right, outside of Malik Nabers, so let's go through the Giants. Wando Robinson actually projects pretty well at 7,800. It's kind of insane just looking at the volume for those two, just like the target share for those two relative to everybody else, 24.9%. With Malik Nabers having the highest target share in the league, Wando Robinson still has 24.9% target share. That is very, very high. And though that does include a couple games without Malik Nabers, but even before Malik Nabers left, I mean, he's the 13th highest target share in the NFL for Wando Robinson. That's pretty nuts for a wide receiver two, particularly when your wide receiver one has the highest target share in the league. And he does get targets. He gets a ton of targets, even in games with Malik Nabers. I think he's fine. 28% projected ownership in the flex for Wando Robinson. If I had to guess, I would guess I come in slightly under that. 5% projected ownership in the captain spot. Again, I think I probably come in a little bit light on Wando Robinson. I don't know for sure that I do, but I think that would be my preference. I think that there are other players that I like better. But he does have just, if you like PPR scam players like I do on this slate, that obviously helps for Wando. Like he is the ultimate PPR scam player. Doesn't put up a ton of yards, doesn't score a lot of touchdowns, but he's going to get those PPR points. So yeah, I like Wando. I'd like him better if he was $1,000 cheaper, but even at 7,800, I think that I prefer Wandale over Devin Singletary, for example. Like I think I have no issue with the ownership he's getting. I probably end up pretty close to the projected ownership for Wandale because he could just have 8 receptions in this game for 60 yards and not even score a touchdown. Be the player that you need. He's a great PPR scam. I did not know that. Is that still true? I thought he had one game this year where he went off. But not a concern in this game. Yeah, exactly. As Devin says, if he scores 18, that's going to be enough in this game for Wando Robinson. Yeah, it's not a huge shock that he's never put up 20 PPR points. A little bit because he has games where he has like again 8 receptions, whatever. But I guess he just doesn't have that many yards. Never gets over that 100-yard bonus. Doesn't really score that many touchdowns. So again, I think I prefer him in the flex. Don't really have any issue with the captain ownership because again, at 18 fantasy points, that might be enough even in the captain in this game if it does go, the way a lot of people are anticipating. No issue there. And then beyond those two, I think it's just not Darius Slayton, next man up for the Giants. He's 5,800. Man, that's kind of expensive for his role with when you have Malik Nabers there. He had a really, really strong role with Malik Nabers out. We saw Slayton come in and basically take on that Malik Nabers role for a bit. Let's see his game log here. So we saw him go back to his regular role. So he had, a strong enough role for a while. I guess 4, 4, 2, and 5 targets. And these are all games with Malik Nabers. So he has seen some targets, running plenty of routes. But the games that he actually went off and you saw his price tag come up is because 11 targets back-to-back games with Malik Nabers out. He just stepped right into the Malik Nabers role, and they used him as though he was Malik Nabers in those games. With Malik Nabers there, as you can see, it's 4, 4, 2, 5, and 3 targets. So about 3 or 4 targets per game on average when Malik Nabers is there. It's a hefty price tag for that role at 5,800. Where's the ownership coming in at on Darius Slayton? Slayton coming in at 15, honestly, 16% projected ownership. I don't hate that. Like he's always out on the field. Yeah, I think if he does score a touchdown at 5,800, you're probably going to want him in your lineup. So I have no issue with 15, 16% ownership. He can get there even without a touchdown. Like if he sees 5 targets and he catches 4 of them for 60 yards, that could be enough, I think, in this game. So I have no issue with this 16% ownership. I might even come in over that. I'm not in love with it, so I don't know that I would, but 2% captain ownership also seems fine. Again, let's look at his. Should I do just games? Let me look at Darius Slayton just in games with Malik Nabers there. So that's week 1, 2, 3, 4, and 7. While I'm doing this, reminder, please do subscribe to the channel, like the video, hit the notification button if you want to be notified when these shows go live. And of course, if you want access to this Fantasy Points data suite that I'm using, you can use promo code Flannelverse to get 50% off any product. This is the data suite that I'm using here, but whatever package you want, you can get for 50% off for the rest of the season using promo code Flannelverse. All right, now let me look at Slayton. So in games with Malik Nabers, 10% target share, 18 targets in 5 games. So not seeing a ton of targets. 13.1 ADOT, 235 air yards is not nothing. I think he's viable at 5,800. He's not like a priority for me. Let's take a look at Wan'Dale Robinson since I've already split it out this way. Wan'Dale Robinson in games with Malik Nabers there, 25.9% target share. He has 45 targets in 5 games. So what is that? 9 targets per game with Malik Nabers in the lineup for Wan'Dale Robinson. That is so nuts. 74.4% route participation. Looks pretty strong there. All right, and I'm going to go back to all games. And there's nobody else. Like Jalen Hyatt is basically a non-factor with Malik, with everybody else healthy. I guess he has contingent value if one of the other starters gets hurt. You could see Jalen Hyatt come in, but not a priority at all. Probably doesn't make my player pool. On the other side of it, we have George Pickens, of course, the second best projection of any receiver on the slate. Also expected to have be shadowed. Here, let me pull up George Pickens, one of the better matchups. You can see here, this is top 10 or so matchup for George Pickens with Deonte Banks. Very positive matchup. So everything looks great for George Pickens. Looked good last week with Russell Wilson. Everything looks pretty bullish here. Hard to argue with George Pickens here. I think I'm going to want to have a lot of George Pickens. Yeah, it's an interesting idea that we haven't seen it yet where they've pushed targets to Slayton. They kind of just force targets to Malik Nabers and Wan'Dale Robinson. I guess it's possible that if Joey Porter shuts down Malik Nabers and they double, maybe they do the Belichick thing and double Wan'Dale Robinson and then they force it. But I don't know. I think the ownership is reasonable. Like it kind of accounts for that type of scenario. George Pickens in the captain spot. 14.5% ownership. So that's interesting. He's getting a higher ownership than Malik Nabers. Much better matchup, I guess. So I think I said I'll probably get over this ownership on Malik Nabers. I probably get over 14.5% on George Pickens. Also, probably try to get to about 20% of each of them. I think they're two of the stronger captain options on the slate. Should see a number of targets. He's not really the dink and dunk type receiver. And I do think the Giants will be able to generate some pressure on Russell Wilson also, which does not benefit George Pickens. Obviously, he's more of a deeper threat, but I still think he's a very strong play. 38% projected ownership in the flex. So yeah, he's going to be one of my favorite plays on the slate. One of the reasons that I'm probably going to be lighter on the quarterbacks is I do like the top receivers for both teams. I think George Pickens just looks great. We can look at schedule adjusted stuff. I guess we didn't look at it for the Giants either. Not the best spot here. It is for the Steelers is actually bottom 7 matchup, and then bottom 8. So both are in the bottom 8 in terms of matchups for receivers. But you can only pick players from this one game. Not a huge concern for me. I think George Pickens should be able to have some success in this matchup. And look good with Russell Wilson. I don't know, small sample size. I don't want to read too much into that one game. But yeah, I think it looks pretty good. Okay. Should I bet all my money on Steelers money line? What is the actual line? It's like 7? Wait, it's up here. 6-point spread on Steelers money line. I probably would not bet all your money. It's in Pittsburgh. I probably only bet 3/4 of your money. Not financial advice, by the way. Okay. Outside of George Pickens, then it's Calvin Austin and Van Jefferson. Um, let's take a look at last week in particular. Man, I was in on Van Jefferson, and that did not go well for me at all. It is funny, the narrative of Russell Wilson. So they were playing the Jets the last game, and it was like, okay, the best spot to attack the Jets is middle of the field. They're already bad. They were missing defenders, and it was like, but the counter to that was, but Russell Wilson doesn't throw over the middle of the field. That held true last week. He just does not throw over the middle of the field at all, which does make things a little bit tough for players like Kelvin Austin. But 64.5% route participation, did see 4 targets in that game. I think that's kind of the role that he has had recently. Here, let's see. Oh, Austin Hooper's there. Okay. 4 targets last week, 5 the week prior on 50% route participation. Still seems like a pretty, reasonable play, depending on ownership. And Kelvin Austin in the flex coming in at 19.5% ownership. Yeah, 3,000. Is out on the field over half the time. Should see a handful of targets. I think he looks good. No issue with this ownership number. Might come in over that. I don't feel like super strongly that he needs to be in 30% of your lineups. Yeah, these damn bots are. I don't know when they started and why they keep coming back when we delete them immediately, but they just they have found my channel and they attack my channel. I think he looks pretty good. Like, he's not guaranteed to hit. He could be a 0, but he should see 4 or 5 targets, be on the field, running routes. He's only 3,000, not crazy high ownership. So yeah, I like Kelvin Austin. Not like a huge stand there. Van Jefferson, he's up at 4,000, projected for 15% ownership, and he's also out on the field for most of the routes. So let's see, Van. 67.7% route participation last week, saw 3 targets. The week prior, 68.8%, 0 targets. The week prior to that, 77.4, 5 targets. 78.6, 3 targets. He's very much a hit or miss player. I think his ADOT is not actually, I think of him as having a like ADOT pretty far down the field. I don't believe that has actually been the case so far this year. Let's look. Yeah, only 10.1 ADOT. I think he's a pretty strong play. 8.4% target share is insanely low. So don't love that. Only 16 targets on the year in 7 games, a little bit more than 2 targets per game for Van Jefferson. I think he did leave one of those games. He left really early, so that maybe affects things a little bit. But just a really low target share for Van Jefferson. But all things considered, at 4,000, 15% ownership, runs out wide, which again is the only place Russell Wilson can see on the field. Seems like a pretty good number for Van Jefferson. I would imagine I come in overweight to 15% on Van Jefferson. And then there are no other Steelers receivers that I think we need to talk about here. I think it just comes down to Pickens, Calvin Austin, and Van Jefferson. And I think that does it for receiver. So we can move on and look at the tight ends. Oh, it's not just me. That's good to hear. Who was your top captain? I'd say I'm sort of eating the chalk with Malik Nabers and George Pickens. Outside of those two, I think Tyrone Tracy is my favorite, like sort of contrarian captain. So I'd say those 3. Yeah, we don't know this. Unclear who's, like, Brian Dable was asked specifically, is Devin Singletary going to take on his bigger workload again? And he would not answer, just said all 3 of the running backs are going to get involved. So we don't really know who's starting the game, who's going to get the most usage. It's kind of up in the air at running back. I'm making my bet on Tyrone Tracy, in part because he's coming in. He has much lower salary. I think there's a pretty good chance that he gets the bulk of the workload and doesn't necessarily need to pay off his salary. So yeah, that's how I'm seeing it, but not super confident in who gets the bulk of the workload there. All right, let's move on. Talk about tight ends. Pat Freiermuth, the top projected tight end, and he has a pretty good role here. Again, look at Freiermuth's usage. first game with Russell Wilson, only saw 2 targets, 71% route participation. But the rest route participation has been pretty strong, around 70%, give or take 5-10% there. So he's out there on the field. Doesn't see a ton of usage. Let's actually take a look at schedule adjusted stuff for tight ends. So this is schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed. Doesn't stand out as, where is it? Oh, it's toward the bottom 5 matchup for Pat Freiermuth here with the Giants. Also could see a dock from playing, like, if Russell Wilson can't see the center of the field, that's probably not great for Pat Freiermuth. Hopefully that changes. Maybe I'm sure at some point Russell Wilson will throw to somebody over the center of the field, and that would benefit Pat Freiermuth. It's not the best matchup, but again, he's out there on the field. He's 6,200, so the price isn't that bad for Freiermuth. I think he is a fine play, not my favorite play. I'm not super confident that he's gonna catch more than a couple passes, but 22.5% ownership at 6,200 for one of the players who's going to be out on the field the most, running the most routes. I think it's okay. Just doesn't stand out, and it's with the Giants, so like I think the Steelers are more likely to be able to put up some touchdowns here, and I think Freiermuth is always going to be an end zone threat, so I think he is a fine play. But not like a huge priority. Like he probably needs to score a touchdown to pay off 6,200. I think it's unlikely that you see Freiermuth get like 7 receptions for 80 yards or something like that. It's possible, but I think it's more likely he's going to pay off if he scores a touchdown. I think it's not the worst bet for him to score a touchdown in this game. I think the Steelers are more likely to be able to put up some points. Ultimately not taking any major stand there on Freiermuth. Again, it's a bad matchup by schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed. He just doesn't have that great of a role on the Steelers. 3%. I mean, I don't love 3% projected cap ownership for Freiermuth. I guess, if you want to play it was National Tight Ends Day yesterday, right? If you want to play that narrative of maybe they get their tight ends in on the action, yeah, that's right. Maybe these teams do force it to their tight ends a little bit more. I'm not totally buying it. But I think he's getting enough ownership that I don't really like. I don't want to endorse it and say I love that ownership, but I think it is totally fine. Brittany asks, how many Steelers in a lineup? I think the majority of the field are going to have 4 Steelers. If I had to guess, I bet the chalkiest build is going to be 4-2 Steelers. I don't really think that way, where I'm like planning out, like I don't set rules for like I want to have this many Steelers, this many Giants in my lineups. It all is going to be kind of lineup dependent, but I think you can make a lot of good lineups that have 5 Steelers in them. I don't think you definitely don't need to, though. I think you can build good lineups that have any number. So I don't have, if I were building one lineup, my guess would be that I have Tyrone, Tracy, and at least a couple Giants in there. So I don't think it would be a 5-1 Steelers lineup. At the very least, it would probably be I might even if I were building one lineup, try to play it more for the Giant side of it with like Tyrone, Tracy, and Malik Nabers, and maybe Daniel Jones. I don't know. It's a tough question because I'm going to build again 30 lineups, and I'm going to have run the gamut. I will have a good number of, I'll have a couple at least Giants onslaughts in there. But I don't know if I were building one. I'll play around with lineups later, so I guess we can see how many Steelers make it in. Honestly, it'll probably be more than it should be because the Steelers just all look pretty good. All right. So Freiermuth looks pretty good. Darnell Washington, that was our guy on the last Showdown slate. I mean, I shouldn't say that like that. Like he wasn't like a flag planted him or anything, but we talked about the usage had gone up, and it's funny because the usage was not actually that great in the last Showdown slate they were on. He got there because he caught like all of his passes, I think. But the usage did not actually continue to increase. But we kind of noted here. Let me pull up the Darnell Washington game log. So prior to that game, the last game, which was a Showdown slate with the Jets, I pointed out that you look at his first few games of the year, he had 2 total targets over the first 3 games of the year. The route participation was pretty low, and then the last 3 games prior to last week, he was up higher route participation, kind of in the mid 30s in here, and also had seen 5 targets. We went from 2 targets in 3 games to 5 targets. So the role seemed to be increasing a little bit. And then last week it kind of, was a little bit lower than it had been. Not, I guess he saw 4 targets, but you might remember that they just kept running that kind of misdirection play where they threw it to him off to the side, of the field, where Russell Wilson can see. It worked really well for him. Like they just kept doing this where they're just throwing it to him short and then letting him rumble for 5 yards, and it worked. So maybe they go back to Darnell Washington again. They do the same kind of thing where they just kind of like manufacture short passes to Darnell Washington, let their 6'7" bully tight end just like rumble through guys. It was working. So hopefully they continue to go back to Darnell Washington, and he's coming in at pretty low ownership. So with the role being a little bit better the past 4 games than it had been early in the year, and with the success they had with it last week in Russell Wilson's first game, I kind of like the idea of going back to Darnell Washington at 9% ownership. Again, not going to project really well, but he's also the kind of tight end that you would anticipate should be used in the end zone. Like they should target their 6'7" tight end. He has at least one touchdown that was just like threw it to him in the end zone already on the year. So I think Washington looks pretty good at 9% projected flex ownership. Again, I prefer him in the flex to the captain. I don't think I go there in the captain spot, but 9% flex ownership for Darnell Washington. I do like that number quite a bit. I think I come in overweight to that. I think those are the only Pittsburgh. Connor Hayward, man, that's one that I didn't even talk about him, I think, on a showdown slate, and then he scored a touchdown and had randomly had 4 touchdowns. 4 targets. Let me see if let me double check myself on that. Is it OR? Yeah. It was this game where just it's Pittsburgh, Dallas, and Connor Hayward. You don't really need to consider because he's running 5-8 routes, just like the standard backup tight end. And then, of course, on the showdown slate, had 4 targets and caught a touchdown, and then went back to 1 and 0 targets. He's typically doesn't have a great role for the Steelers. Could spike a week where he has a handful of targets, scores a touchdown. But he's the classic backup tight end. If he scores a touchdown, you'll want him. If he doesn't touchdown, you probably don't want him. I'm probably not getting to any Connor Hayward in my 30 lineups. The other side of it, Theo Johnson to me is one of the more interesting plays on the slate. I think I end up playing a good amount of Theo Johnson, at least relative to the field. He's only 2,400. I think that I've said this. I think the Giants have been on at least a couple showdown slates already, and I always end up playing more of Theo Johnson than I probably should. But I'm going to again today. He's a rookie, big guy, tight end, 2,400. The price is right. The role is pretty good here for Theo Johnson. As we saw, schedule adjusted stuff, it's actually a good matchup. One of the rare good matchups with the Steelers. Tight ends have had success, at least in terms of schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed. It is the 7th best matchup for tight ends so far this year. So factoring in his pretty strong usage, not like use, at least in terms of route participation, the usage last week, 80% route participation, 0 targets, but 80% route participation, pretty strong there. The week prior, 3 targets on 60%. The week prior to that, 5 targets, 71.8%. So looks a little bit better lately than it was earlier in the year. I guess he had 4 targets week 1, but then 0, 2, 1. I don't know, 8 targets over the past 3 weeks, and running a lot of routes and gets sort of a nice matchup. And like I said, this is a game where I'm anticipating a lot of pressure on the quarterbacks, which should result in a lot of kind of dink and dunk, shorter type passes. And I think that benefits running backs who catch, but also does I think it should be a positive impact on tight ends, players who just typically don't have really long ADOTs. And you can see ADOT Theo Johnson's ADOT is very, very low on the season. So yeah, I think Theo Johnson, he's one, somebody asked about pick 6 yesterday. I made a pick 6 card or 2, and I included Theo Johnson over 1.5 receptions. I think he's a pretty good bet there. I think it's just going to be kind of a lot of short passes in this game, and it should benefit Theo Johnson. So I'm going to play him at 2,400 at low ownership. And actually, did we already look at the ownership on Theo Johnson? It's down here at 10% projected ownership. I think that's a pretty strong player for a player who's running all the routes. Could spike 5 targets in the game, and might even be more than that, because we could just see a lot of short passes should theoretically benefit him. So I like Theo Johnson quite a bit. Daniel Bellinger, I don't think he has much of a role anymore, but let me just double check. Bellinger, 3 routes last week, 2, 1, 4, just not running that many routes. 1 target last week. He's the classic. If he scores a touchdown, you want him. Not a priority for me. In a 150 set, you can sprinkle him in, hope for a touchdown. That's basically all he is. Let's see. Okay. Thank you for that. Not fooling around. Yes, I am hoping to get over 5,000 subscribers by the end of the season. So would appreciate any of you subscribing if you haven't already done so. Let me get rid of this bot now. But that's not what I meant to do. I didn't mean to advertise it. I meant to get rid of it. Let's see. Okay. I think that does it for tight ends. Let me just double check. Yeah, I don't think I'm getting to Michael Pruitt. Yeah, I think that does it. So it's I think Theo Johnson I really like at his 10% projected ownership. Darnell Washington I really like at 9% projected ownership. Freiermuth is kind of meh at getting a little bit more ownership than those two. I don't think I'm going to take a huge stand against it, but I'm not like forcing Freiermuth into my lineups. If I end up at having him in just 10%, I think I'd be fine with that. But if I end up at 25%, I'll kind of let the optimizer do its thing. I'm not really trying to force Freiermuth one way or the other. If I were getting to like 50%, then I would dock his projection and try to get to less. But in general, I think I'm okay with anything from like 10 to 30% Freiermuth in my lineups, not taking a huge stand there. So defenses and kickers are pretty important on this slate. And I'm realizing, man, we're getting close to lock. So I got to be kind of quick here. Going to get a lot of ownership on the Steelers defense. And I think that's probably reasonable. Like I think Giants offensive line banged up, Steelers very good defense, should generate a lot of pressure, should get 5 sacks, maybe more. I shouldn't say should, but only 27% projected ownership here in the flex. I believe other places have them higher. At 27%, I would be like, I like that number. 27% of the Steelers defense in what I anticipate being a low scoring game where I think they could wreak some havoc, cause some turnovers. I like that number for the Steelers. I would probably get overweight to 27%, but I'll probably shoot for 30% or so of the Steelers defense. Yeah, I think they look really good. They're in a great spot. Makes sense. They're going to get a lot of ownership. I think they're also going to get some captain ownership projected for 4% projected ownership in the captain spot. That feels fine to me. If you play 25 lineups, I think having one Steelers lineup in the captain spot is right. Now, Giants are projected for 18% ownership at 3,400. I like that number. I think I could see myself getting on top of that number. I think I probably do come in a little bit higher than that. Again, Russell Wilson, I'm not a believer in Russell Wilson being like awesome. So I think it's a pretty good bet here at 18% ownership that they're going to be able to have success, cause some turnovers on the Steelers. So yeah, I like some Giants defenses. And then the kickers, Greg Joseph, 15%. I like that number. I like that number on Greg Joseph. Could see the Giants just move the ball and then not get into the end zone. I think that's certainly reasonable in a low scoring game to get overweight on 15%, 14.5% Greg Joseph. Boswell, 19%, I think I actually prefer that 5K Chris Boswell because I think the Steelers might be able to move the ball on the Giants and then just, be forced to kick the ball. Not, they're not an awesome offense. So I like that number. Also, defenses and kickers, I think, look particularly good on this slate where we're not anticipating that many touchdowns. I think the Giants defense, actually, at this ownership number, 27%, Steelers defense that's a really strong play. The Giants defense, I think, is a strong play. Also, just getting fairly low ownership here. Let me look at FanDuel. I'm trying to be quick now. If you can't tell, kind of going through this quickly because I need to make my lineups after we're done here. Giants, we'll start with the MVP spot. Russell Wilson, 23% projected ownership. I would anticipate I would be lower than that number. If I were making one lineup, who would I like here? Malik Nabers, 9% looks pretty strong. That might be where I go. 3.5%. I love this 3.5% for Tyrone Tracy. I think there's like he would have to outscore everybody because there's no salary multiplier on FanDuel, but I think he's still a pretty good bet at 3.5%. Wanda Robinson actually 3% doesn't seem bad on FanDuel. But probably if I were making one lineup, it would be either Nabers or Pickens in my MVP spot on FanDuel. I think those are pretty strong ownership numbers. Both are pretty good bets to be the highest scoring MVP on FanDuel. So I think that would be where I would go if I was making just one lineup. Or Najee Harris, I also like a bit there. As far as I don't usually get that contrarian with my. This is a slate where you could get a little bit more contrarian at MVP and just hope that somebody like Van Jefferson scores a long touchdown. It's a low scoring game. So this may be more inclined than usual to get off the board at MVP, but probably if I was making one, it would just be Nabers or Pickens. In the flex, so we've got, I think the quarterback ownership seems fair. Najee Harris, I like that. I mean, 29% looks really good for Najee Harris on the flex on FanDuel. Again, I'm going to like Pickens and Nabers. Both of these numbers look really good. Steelers defense, that looks good. Warren at 21.5%. He's only 9,500. I think that's, yeah, I like that number for Warren. Obviously, Tracy, not quite the value that he was on DraftKings at 11,500. Not slamming him on DraftKings or on FanDuel. I don't like him as much on FanDuel. Still, like, no real issue with it. Theo Johnson, 6%. That looks really good at 7,000. Theo Johnson, this is probably the range that I really like, would attack Van Jefferson, Darnell Washington, Theo Johnson, getting pretty low ownership on FanDuel and more likely to be able to keep up with the starters. So I think that's kind of a range that I really like here. Slayton looks okay. Austin looks, but both look pretty reasonable at these ownership numbers. But yeah, the Giants defense, 16% projected ownership. That looks really good to me on FanDuel. I would definitely attack that a bit. Kickers defenses look strong. Okay. I think those are the only notes on FanDuel that are a little bit different. Now, so I've already set, let me see if I've already set my rules on Lineup HQ, because normally I go into DraftKings and play around with hand building lineups. Maybe I should just do it here. Let's see. I think I'm just going to smash. No issue with that. So currently how I have it set up, and I'm just going to run this real quick. So I've already set my groups. So I did groups for all of the quarterbacks, as I always do. So I've got a Russell Wilson at captain group where I have these are the players I'm requiring at least 2 to 4. Russell Wilson in the flex, same players, and then also including them at captain. Oh, and I want to move this down to 1 to 3 when I have Russell Wilson in the flex. Then I have my, and I didn't do this. Okay. So now I've got my Daniel Jones captain lineup. These are the players I want when I have Daniel Jones at captain. I want to have 1 to 4 when I have Daniel Jones at captain. I might force 2. Maybe I'll force 2 because I'm not playing that many lineups. And then I have the lineup that I duplicated, same players, except they're also in the captain spot. Now I'm going to put in 1 to 3. So I always have at least one Giants player when I have Daniel Jones in the flex. Go back to my player pool. And if I'm doing 30 lineups, I don't know if this is, maybe I'll just hand build one for the fun of it. But these are the lineups that come out. So the first lineup that comes out, and I turned on some build rules, including 20% randomness. I set a cap on salary at 49,200. I vary that. I haven't played around with it much today. Usually I like to do a minimum fantasy points threshold of 2. So let me try this again. So I'm going to build 30 lineups again. So the top one that comes out here is, and man, it's the display is weird on this computer. Russell Wilson with Kelvin Austin, Jalen Warren, George Pickens, and then I have Malik Nabers, Tyrone, Tracy in this one. And I have not done anything to play with the projections yet. So this is not necessarily a lineup that I'm forcing in, but looks like a strongly correlated lineup. Russell Wilson with 2 of the pass catchers that I kind of like. I like Tyrone Tracy quite a bit. You can see my exposures over here. Again, I haven't done anything to play with. This is just using Roto Grinders projections here. All right, I'm gonna do it the old-fashioned way and just build a lineup here on DraftKings, and then I'm gonna go and play with these lineups. Good thing I am virtually set up, so I'm just gonna go in here. So Tyrone Tracy, I like Tyrone Tracy at captain. Let's try that first. Now I'm gonna throw in, see if I can do both Nabers and Pickens. I can pretty easily. 78.66 left. Now I am going to want to leave some salary on the table, but could I go to Harris? Yeah, I can go to, here's what I can do. I can go to Harris and Warren. I like that. And now I have 7,200 left. Now, if I play Freiermuth, I'm leaving 1,000 on the table. That would be okay. Could go down to Slayton. Now, if I play, do I want to play Steelers defense? So I'm leaving 1,800 on the table with the Steelers defense, both running backs, Najee Harris, Jalen Warren, George Pickens in there, and then Tyrone, Tracy, Malik Nabers. Yeah, I think that looks like a strong enough lineup here. Doesn't correlate like perfectly, but I don't try to correlate things perfectly. I'm mostly just concerned about quarterback correlations. Now let's try a trickier one with one of the others that I like. Let's try a Malik Nabers at captain lineup. Now with Malik Nabers in there, don't necessarily want Daniel Jones in there. Maybe I'll wait and see if I want to add him later. But I'd still be inclined to go to Najee Harris in there. Could go to, so one way to get different is Malik Nabers at captain. Steelers defense probably not going to be super highly owned in Malik Nabers at captain lineups. I still like Tyrone Tracy quite a bit. Now I could also throw in the Giants defense, which I really like. Now I have 12,600 left over. Now I could throw in Daniel Jones, hope that the Giants are actually able to score in the game. So now we've got kind of a 4-2 Giants lineup with Malik Nabers, Tyrone Tracy, Giants defense, Daniel Jones going up against Najee Harris and Steelers defense. Now we've left 3,200 on the table. So you need the Steelers defense to outscore Jalen Warren at anybody up to 8,600. So you need the Steelers defense in this lineup to outscore Devin Singletary, Wan'Dale Robinson, Jalen Warren, Pat Freiermuth. If you don't think that's possible, you would want to replace Steelers defense with one of those players. I think it's possible, though. I think that it's not unreasonable to think that could happen. Also need Tyrone Tracy to outscore Jalen Warren here. But I think this looks like a fine large field lineup. All right, I got to go and make my lineups. Appreciate all of you hanging out with me. If you haven't already done so, please do subscribe to the channel, like the video, comment. All of that is very helpful. I am going to get back to making these lineups, and I'll be back on Thursday. I think Adam and I will do the morning show on Thursday, and then I'll be doing my own show in the evening. Thanks, guys. Good luck tonight. Let's make some money, and I'll catch you later.